Beneath calm coastlines where adventure feels routine, the ocean can shift without warning, turning curiosity into chaos instantly. Sudden impacts, violent surges, and vanishing silhouettes leave survivors rattled and rescuers scrambling. From controlled dives that spiral into terror to casual outings overturned by unseen force, expectations swing from wonder to raw panic. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling and utterly unforgettable encounters. Off the coast of Gansbai, South Africa, the waters had earned a reputation that stretched far beyond the borders of the Western Cape. The small fishing town, located roughly 170 kilometers southeast of Cape Town, had become internationally recognized as one of the premier destinations for great white shark encounters. The convergence of cold Atlantic currents and the presence of nearby seal colonies created ideal hunting grounds for these apex predators, drawing them in predictable patterns throughout the year. By December 2025, the cage diving industry had matured into a well-regulated operation, with experienced operators who prided themselves on safety protocols that had been refined over decades. Marcus Holden had spent months planning this expedition. A marine enthusiast from Brisbane with a particular fascination for shark behavior, he had convinced 4 friends to join him on what he described as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Sophie Lane, a high school biology teacher, had expressed cautious enthusiasm about the trip. Daniel Reyes, who worked in marine insurance and claimed he needed to understand what he was insuring, approached it with calculated curiosity. Claire Thompson, a freelance writer, saw potential for a compelling travel piece. Liam Carter, Marcus's college roommate and the most reluctant of the group, had agreed only after substantial peer pressure and several reassurances about the safety record of cage diving operations. The morning of December 6th began with favorable conditions. The dive operator, a weathered veteran of Gansbai's shark tourism industry, had briefed the group thoroughly on procedures and expectations. He explained that the cage would be tethered securely to the boat, that they would descend only to shallow depths, and that the sharks, while powerful, rarely showed aggressive interest in the steel barriers. The water temperature measured a brisk 14 degrees Celsius, requiring full wetsuits that the operator provided along with masks and regulators. As the boat motored toward a known aggregation site, crew members began chumming the water with a mixture of fish oils and bait, a standard practice to attract sharks within viewing distance. The 5 tourists entered the cage in pairs, with Marcus and Sophie descending first. The visibility proved exceptional, stretching nearly 15 meters in every direction. Within minutes, a great white appeared from the deeper blue, its massive form gliding with deceptive grace. The operator estimated its length at roughly 16 feet, a mature female likely patrolling the area for Cape fur seals. The shark made several passes, allowing Marcus and Sophie to observe its distinctive features before they surfaced to let Daniel and Claire take their turn. When all 5 tourists decided to descend together for a final viewing, the cage felt cramped but manageable. They positioned themselves along the interior bars, each finding a secure handhold. The great white had remained in the vicinity, circling at a distance that suggested mild curiosity rather than predatory intent. What happened next unfolded with shocking suddenness that contradicted every reassurance they had received. The shark accelerated from approximately 20 meters away, its powerful tail propelling it forward with explosive force. Rather than veering off as it had done during previous approaches, the animal maintained its trajectory and struck the cage with tremendous impact. The entire structure shuddered, and a metallic clang reverberated through the water. One of the vertical bars bent inward under the collision, and the shark, rather than retreating, began thrashing against the cage with violent intensity. Its jaws snapped repeatedly, and its body twisted with raw power that seemed impossible for any living creature. Marcus found himself in the worst position. The bent bar had pinned his left arm against another section of the cage, trapping him as the shark continued its assault. Sophie reached for him instinctively, but could do nothing except grip the bars and watch in horror. Daniel, Claire, and Liam pressed themselves against the opposite side of the cage, their eyes wide behind their masks. The silence of the underwater environment made the scene even more surreal. No one could scream, though their facial expressions communicated pure terror. Above the surface, crew members recognized immediately that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The tether line jerked violently, and the buoy marking the cage's position bobbed erratically. The operator shouted orders, and 3 crew members began hauling on the winch system with urgent intensity. The process that normally took 2 minutes felt interminable. The great white, still engaged with the cage, showed no signs of retreat, even as it rose through the water column. When the cage broke the surface, the shark finally released its grip and dove away. Marcus remained pinned, his face contorted in pain. Blood seeped through his wetsuit sleeve, mixing with seawater. The crew worked with practiced efficiency, prying the bent bar away and extracting him from the cage before pulling the others aboard. Sophie surfaced, gasping and shaking. Daniel vomited seawater and breakfast over the side. Claire appeared catatonic, staring at nothing. Liam kept repeating that they needed to leave, that they needed to get away from the water immediately. The boat raced back toward Gansby while the operator radioed ahead for emergency medical services. Marcus's injuries proved severe. The bar had crushed tissue and fractured bones in his forearm, and the shark's proximity during its thrashing had caused additional lacerations. The other 4 tourists remained physically unharmed but deeply shaken. Paramedics met them at the harbor, transporting Marcus to a regional hospital where surgeons worked for hours to repair the damage. In the aftermath, investigators examined the cage and determined that the force of the impact had exceeded any previous recorded incident in the area's cage diving history. Marine biologists speculated that the shark may have mistaken the cage for a competing predator or reacted to some unknown stimulus. The operator suspended operations pending a full safety review. Marcus eventually recovered most function in his arm after months of physical therapy, though he admitted to reporters that his fascination with sharks had been permanently complicated by trauma. The incident served as a stark reminder that even the most carefully controlled wildlife encounters carried inherent risks, and that great white sharks remained unpredictable predators capable of overwhelming force when circumstances aligned in unexpected ways. On the northern coast of Australia, the remote waterways near the Gulf of Carpentaria had long attracted adventurers seeking untouched natural environments. The region, characterized by intricate mangrove systems and tidal channels that shifted dramatically with lunar cycles, remained largely undeveloped despite its proximity to several small coastal settlements. By April 2020, the area had gained modest recognition among documentary filmmakers and environmental researchers who valued its biodiversity and relative isolation from commercial tourism. The channels, fed by both freshwater rivers and tidal surges from the Arafura Sea, created murky conditions that supported complex food chains while simultaneously limiting visibility to dangerous levels. Liam Porter had built a career documenting remote ecosystems for educational platforms. A 34-year-old freelance cinematographer from Perth, he specialized in solo expeditions that allowed him to work at his own pace without the logistical complications of crew members. His current project focused on mangrove ecosystems and their role in supporting juvenile fish populations. The assignment required extended periods of quiet observation, making a kayak the ideal vessel for navigating shallow waters without disturbing wildlife. Liam had completed similar projects in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines without incident, building confidence that sometimes bordered on complacency regarding personal safety. On the morning of April 15th, Liam launched his kayak from a temporary camp he had established near a tidal channel roughly 40 kilometers from the nearest town. His colleague Marina Lopez, a marine ecologist conducting parallel research on coral adaptation, had positioned herself on a motorized dinghy approximately 200 meters away. They maintained radio contact but worked independently, each focused on separate aspects of the broader ecosystem study. The water appeared particularly turbid that morning, stirred by overnight tides and the movement of large schools of baitfish that created visible disturbances on the surface. Liam paddled slowly along the channel's edge, occasionally pausing to film sequences of mangrove roots and the small creatures that inhabited them. He wore a lightweight wetsuit despite the warm air temperature, a precaution against jellyfish and the occasional stonefish that frequented the shallows. His kayak, a stable 14-foot touring model, handled the choppy conditions competently. He had been on the water for roughly 90 minutes when the situation deteriorated with horrifying speed. The tiger shark struck from directly below. At approximately 14 feet in length, the predator had been patrolling the channel in search of sea turtles and large fish. The murky water had prevented Liam from seeing any warning signs, and the shark itself likely mistook the kayak's silhouette for prey. The impact flipped the vessel instantly, catapulting Liam into the turbid water. He surfaced, gasping, disoriented, his first instinct to reach for the overturned kayak. Before he could grab the hull, the shark clamped onto his torso with tremendous force. Marina Lopez heard the splash and looked up from her equipment to see the kayak capsized and Liam thrashing in the water. She screamed his name and immediately started the dinghy's engine, but the distance and the churning water made a rapid response impossible. She grabbed a bright orange lifebuoy from her boat and prepared to throw it. her hands shaking as she accelerated toward his position. The shark twisted violently, its characteristic head-shaking behavior designed to tear flesh from large prey. Liam's arms flailed above the surface for several seconds before the predator dragged him under completely. Marina reached the location within 40 seconds of the initial attack, but Liam had already disappeared beneath the murky surface. She circled the area, calling his name desperately, scanning for any sign of movement. The water had settled eerily, with only the overturned kayak remaining as evidence of the catastrophe. She radioed for emergency assistance immediately, providing coordinates and a description of what she had witnessed. Her voice cracked as she explained that she had seen a large shark, that Liam had gone under, and that he had not resurfaced. The shark released Liam's body approximately 15 meters from the attack site, likely determining that the prey did not match its preferred food sources. When rescue crews arrived 3 hours later, they recovered his remains from the channel bottom. The coroner's report confirmed massive trauma to his chest and abdomen consistent with a large tiger shark bite. Marina provided detailed statements to investigators, though she remained haunted by her inability to reach him in time. The incident prompted renewed discussions about solo kayaking in predator-rich waters. Marine biologists noted that tiger sharks frequently patrolled such channels during morning hours, particularly when bait fish activity increased. The murky conditions that made the area scientifically interesting also created perfect ambush opportunities for sharks hunting by silhouette rather than sight. Liam's family established a memorial fund supporting safety equipment for researchers working in remote marine environments, though they acknowledged that some risks remained inherent to the work he loved. The Central Pacific Ocean, far from any continental landmass, presented diving conditions that differed dramatically from coastal environments. In September 2021, a remote drop-off located approximately 600 kilometers northeast of the Marquesas Islands attracted specialized researchers studying pelagic fish populations. The area, characterized by extreme depths and crystalline water clarity, existed beyond the reach of recreational diving operations. Only scientific expeditions with substantial funding and technical expertise attempted work in such isolated locations. The nearest emergency medical facilities lay more than 2 days away by boat, making any serious incident potentially catastrophic. Ethan Morales had earned his doctorate in marine biology from a university in California 3 years earlier, specializing in the behavior of open ocean predators. At 31, he had participated in numerous blue water diving expeditions, developing skills that few researchers possessed. His current project, funded by an international oceanographic institute, involved documenting hunting strategies of yellowfin tuna and their interactions with smaller pelagic species. The work required extended periods underwater, often alone, while the support vessel maintained position hundreds of meters away. Ethan had completed 12 similar dives over the previous 2 weeks without encountering any significant marine life beyond his target species. On the morning of September 22nd, conditions appeared optimal. The ocean surface showed minimal wave action, and underwater visibility extended beyond 60 meters in every direction. Sunlight penetrated deep into the water column, creating an ethereal blue void that simultaneously fascinated and unsettled even experienced divers. Ethan descended to approximately 40 meters, drifting above an underwater plateau that rose from abyssal depths. His rebreather system allowed for extended bottom time without producing the bubble streams that might disturb fish behavior. He carried standard research equipment, including measuring devices and a small collection net, along with a dive knife secured to his calf. The oceanic whitetip appeared without warning, materializing from the infinite blue as though conjured from the void itself. At roughly 9 feet in length, the shark displayed the characteristic rounded fins and bold white markings that gave the species its name. Ethan recognized it immediately and understood the potential danger. Oceanic whitetips had earned notorious reputations among sailors and divers for their aggressive curiosity and willingness to investigate anything unusual in their territory. Unlike coastal species that might make a single investigatory pass, these sharks often circled repeatedly, testing potential prey with increasing boldness. The shark completed its first circle at a distance of approximately 10 meters, its small eyes fixed on Ethan's position. He maintained neutral buoyancy and avoided sudden movements, following protocols for oceanic encounters. The shark circled again, closer this time, its pectoral fins angled downward in a posture that experienced divers recognized as assertive rather than merely curious. On the third pass, it nudged his fins aggressively, testing his reaction. Ethan's heart rate accelerated despite his training, and his breathing became less controlled. The attack came on the fourth circle. The shark accelerated suddenly and clamped onto his right calf with shocking force. Ethan felt the teeth puncture his wetsuit and penetrate flesh as the predator twisted violently, attempting to determine if he represented viable prey. The spinning motion disoriented him completely, and his regulator nearly came loose from his mouth. Acting on instinct rather than conscious thought, he reached for his dive knife and jabbed at the shark's snout, aiming for the sensitive areas near its eyes. The blade connected twice before the shark released its grip and retreated several meters. Ethan kicked frantically toward the surface, abandoning all standard decompression protocols in favor of immediate escape. Blood streamed from his calf, creating a visible trail in the clear water. The shark followed but did not attack again, apparently deciding that this particular prey involved too much resistance. Ethan broke the surface, gasping, his leg throbbing with intense pain. He inflated his buoyancy compensator fully and waved his arms to attract attention from the support vessel. The boat crew reached him within 3 minutes, hauling him aboard and immediately applying pressure to the wound. The shark had created deep punctures on both sides of his calf, though it had missed major blood vessels. The captain radioed for medical advice while crew members cleaned and bandaged the injury. Ethan remained conscious throughout, describing the encounter in detail despite shock and pain. The expedition was aborted immediately, with the vessel heading toward the nearest port capable of providing proper medical treatment. Ethan spent 2 weeks recovering in a hospital in Tahiti, receiving antibiotics to prevent infection and undergoing minor surgery to repair damaged tissue. The wounds healed without permanent damage to muscle function, though he carried prominent scars. He later acknowledged that the encounter had fundamentally altered his approach to solo blue water diving, imposing psychological barriers that years of experience had failed to create. The waters off Cape Cod, Massachusetts, had undergone dramatic ecological changes over the preceding 2 decades. By July 2025, the region supported a recovering gray seal population that numbered in the tens of thousands, concentrated along particular stretches of coastline where rocky outcrops provided ideal haul-out locations. These seal colonies, while celebrated by conservationists, had attracted increasing numbers of great white sharks that recognized the area as prime hunting territory. The convergence of seals, sharks, and human water activities created conditions that marine biologists and safety officials monitored with growing concern. Sophie Lane had moved to Cape Cod 5 years earlier, leaving behind a corporate career in Boston to operate a small tour company specializing in wildlife viewing. At 37, she had developed extensive knowledge of local marine life and had obtained various certifications, including jet ski operation licenses and first aid qualifications. Her business offered seasonal tours that showcased seals, seabirds, and occasionally whales, always maintaining what she considered safe distances from wildlife. On the morning of July 8th, she had planned a solo reconnaissance run to assess seal activity before an afternoon tour, a routine she followed several times weekly during peak season. The morning presented near-perfect conditions. Air temperature hovered around 22 degrees Celsius, and the ocean surface showed only gentle swells from overnight winds that had subsided at dawn. Sophie launched her jet ski from a public access point shortly after 7 o'clock, timing her departure to coincide with low tide, when seals typically congregated on exposed rocks. She wore a full wetsuit despite the mild weather, having learned through experience that even July water temperatures in Cape Cod rarely exceeded 16 degrees. Her route followed a familiar path along the coastline, passing several seal colonies that had established themselves on rocky formations roughly 200 meters from shore. The seals appeared active that morning, diving and surfacing repeatedly in patterns that suggested feeding activity. Sophie slowed her jet ski to observe, maintaining a respectful distance while mentally noting locations that would provide good viewing opportunities for her afternoon clients. She had paused near one particular rock formation when the great white struck from below. The shark, estimated by subsequent investigators at approximately 16 feet in length, had been patrolling the area in search of seals. The combination of the jet ski's silhouette on the surface and nearby seal activity likely contributed to the attack. The predator surged upward with explosive force, ramming the underside of the watercraft with its snout and upper body. The impact launched Sophie into the air before she crashed into the frigid water several meters from the jet ski. She surfaced, gasping, the cold water shocking her system despite the wetsuit. The jet ski bobbed nearby, its engine killed by the impact. The shark circled the area, its dorsal fin visible above the surface as it investigated the disturbance. Sophie's training emphasized remaining calm during marine emergencies, but terror overrode rational thought. She swam toward the jet ski with desperate strokes, her only goal to put something between herself and the predator. The shark approached the jet ski again, its jaws snapping at the craft's hull in what appeared to be investigatory biting behavior. Foam erupted across the surface as the animal thrashed against the watercraft. Sophie reached the jet ski and grabbed its side, attempting to haul herself partially out of the water. The shark circled again, passing close enough that she could see its eye regarding her with unsettling focus. A recreational fishing boat operating roughly 300 meters away had noticed the commotion. The captain, an experienced local fisherman named Raymond Chen, recognized immediately that something was seriously wrong. He opened the throttle fully and shouted to his 2 passengers to prepare ropes and a gaff. The boat covered the distance in less than 2 minutes, with Raymond maneuvering carefully to avoid hitting either Sophie or the shark. His passengers threw lines toward Sophie while Raymond positioned the boat between her and the circling predator. She grabbed a rope with shaking hands, and the 2 men hauled her aboard with urgent strength. As she cleared the water, the shark made one final pass near the jet ski before diving and disappearing into deeper water. Sophie collapsed on the deck, trembling violently from cold and shock. Raymond immediately assessed her injuries. Deep lacerations marked her left shoulder where she had struck the jet ski during her initial fall, and her right leg showed puncture wounds that appeared consistent with glancing contact from the shark's teeth. Neither injury threatened her life immediately, but both required medical attention. Raymond radioed the Coast Guard while his passengers applied first aid, using clean towels to apply pressure to the bleeding. A Coast Guard vessel intercepted them 20 minutes later, transferring Sophie to their craft for rapid transport to shore. Paramedics met them at the harbor, and she was transported to a hospital where she received stitches for the lacerations and underwent examination for potential infection. She remained hospitalized for 3 days, receiving antibiotics and undergoing physical therapy to restore shoulder mobility. The incident received significant local media coverage and prompted renewed discussions about recreational water activities near seal colonies. Marine biologists noted that great white sharks had become increasingly common in the area, and that attacks, while still rare, represented predictable consequences of ecological recovery. Sophie eventually recovered fully, but sold her tour business, acknowledging that the psychological trauma had permanently altered her relationship with the ocean she had once loved without reservation. The northern coastline of Australia, stretching across Queensland and into the Northern Territory, featured dramatic geography where ancient rock formations met tropical waters. The region had been shaped by millions of years of geological processes, creating towering sandstone cliffs that rose abruptly from narrow beaches and tidal inlets. By March 2019, certain locations along this coast had gained reputations among adrenaline enthusiasts for offering cliff diving opportunities that combined significant height with supposedly adequate water depth. One particular site, located approximately 15 kilometers south of a small coastal town, featured a 30-foot vertical drop into a tidal inlet that local jumpers had used for years without serious incident. The inlet, carved by millennia of tidal action, connected to the open ocean through a narrow channel that experienced dramatic water level changes throughout each day. The surrounding area remained relatively undeveloped, accessible only via a rough dirt road that discouraged casual tourists while attracting those specifically seeking remote adventure locations. Local indigenous communities had traditional connections to the site, though they rarely used the inlet for fishing due to its unpredictable currents and reputation for harboring dangerous marine life. Commercial tour operators avoided the location entirely, citing liability concerns and the availability of safer alternatives elsewhere along the coast. The lack of official oversight meant that jumpers relied entirely on word-of-mouth assessments of safety conditions, information that often proved incomplete or outdated. Bull sharks had inhabited these coastal waters for countless generations, their unique physiology allowing them to tolerate both saltwater and the brackish conditions found in tidal inlets. Marine researchers had documented their presence throughout the region, noting that the species showed particular abundance during late summer and early autumn when water temperatures peaked and prey concentrations increased. Unlike many shark species that avoided shallow, confined spaces, bull sharks actively sought such environments for hunting, using their stocky build and aggressive nature to exploit prey trapped by tidal movements. The inlet where Evan Harper would jump had likely hosted bull sharks continuously, though previous jumpers had simply been fortunate enough to avoid encounters. Evan Harper had traveled from Melbourne specifically to attempt several documented cliff diving locations along the Queensland coast. At 29, he had built a modest following documenting his various adventures, though he worked primarily as a personal trainer and pursued risky activities during vacation periods. His three friends who accompanied him on this trip, Nathan Cross, Sienna Ward, and Joel Martinez, shared his enthusiasm for extreme activities, though none possessed professional training in diving or water safety. They had driven north from Brisbane over 2 days, camping at various locations and attempting jumps at 3 other sites before arriving at this particular inlet. The previous jumps had gone smoothly, perhaps contributing to a false sense of security about the risks involved. They arrived at the cliff site mid-morning on March 3rd, finding conditions that appeared favorable despite some concern about water clarity. The weather had been calm for several days, with morning temperatures already climbing toward 30 degrees Celsius. The tide had recently turned, and the inlet showed visible turbidity from overnight currents that had stirred sediment from the channel bottom. Schools of baitfish created rippling disturbances across the water's surface, occasionally erupting in panicked movements that suggested larger predators patrolled below. Nathan mentioned that the baitfish activity might indicate sharks in the area, having read various warnings about bull sharks frequenting such tidal inlets along this coast. Evan dismissed the concern, noting that hundreds of people jumped from this cliff annually without incident, and that the water depth exceeded 20 feet even at low tide. The 4 friends spent 30 minutes scouting the jump and preparing their approach. They examined the water from multiple angles, looking for submerged rocks or other obvious hazards. The murky conditions prevented them from seeing more than a meter or 2 below the surface, but they attributed this to normal tidal stirring rather than considering it a warning sign. Joel volunteered to go first, executing a simple feet-first entry that went smoothly. He surfaced within seconds, shouting that the water felt warm and the depth seemed adequate. Sienna followed with similar success, her confident landing reinforcing the group's assessment that conditions were safe. Nathan hesitated at the edge but eventually jumped, surfacing quickly and swimming toward the rocks where his friends waited. Evan, eager to demonstrate superior technique, announced his intention to perform a more complex dive that would rotate him through the air before entry. He sprinted toward the edge and launched himself with practiced form, achieving impressive height and rotation. His body arced gracefully through the morning air, completing nearly a full flip before his feet pointed downward for entry. What Evan could not see from above was the massive bull shark that had entered the inlet with the rising tide, drawn by the concentration of baitfish. The predator, measuring approximately 13 feet in length, had positioned itself directly below the surface where Evan's trajectory would terminate. Evan struck the water feet first and plunged downward. The bull shark reacted instantly to the disturbance, ramming Evan's torso with overwhelming force before its jaws clamped onto his midsection. The attack occurred entirely underwater, invisible to his friends who waited for him to surface. Nathan shouted his name after several seconds had passed without any sign of him. Sienna screamed when she realized something was wrong. Joel dove back into the water, swimming toward where Evan had entered, but the murky conditions prevented him from seeing anything below the surface. The shark twisted violently, its characteristic aggressive behavior amplified by the confined space and the presence of other swimmers. Evan's body went limp within seconds, consciousness lost to massive trauma and shock. The predator dragged him deeper into the inlet, away from where his friends searched frantically. After approximately 20 seconds, the shark released its grip and retreated through the tidal channel toward open water, apparently determining that the prey item did not match its preferred food sources. Nathan and Joel continued diving, trying desperately to locate Evan while Sienna remained on the rocks, screaming for help. A fishing boat operating near the inlet entrance heard the commotion and approached to investigate. The captain radioed for emergency services while his crew assisted in the search. Joel surfaced gasping and crying, reporting that he had seen nothing but murky water, despite multiple attempts to dive down. Rescue personnel arrived 40 minutes later, bringing proper diving equipment and underwater lights. They recovered Evan's body from the inlet bottom, roughly 50 meters from where he had entered the water. The coroner's examination confirmed massive trauma consistent with a large bull shark attack, with injuries that would have caused death within minutes. The 3 surviving friends provided detailed statements to investigators, though all 3 remained traumatized by their inability to save him. The incident prompted local authorities to install warning signs at the cliff site, though they stopped short of prohibiting access entirely. Marine biologists explained that bull sharks frequently used such tidal inlets as hunting corridors, particularly during periods when baitfish concentrated in the confined waters. The species' aggressive nature and tolerance for shallow environments made them particularly dangerous in locations where humans engaged in water activities. Evans' family later established a small memorial at the site, though they acknowledged that his death resulted from risks he had willingly accepted in pursuit of the adrenaline he craved. His 3 friends eventually returned to Melbourne, though none ever attempted cliff diving again, the memory of that morning permanently altering their relationship with risk and adventure. The Florida Keys, stretching southwest from the southern tip of mainland Florida, supported extensive coral reef systems that attracted both tourists and researchers throughout the year. By August 2023, certain reefs within the island chain had become sites for specialized nocturnal research projects aimed at documenting fish spawning behaviors that occurred exclusively after dark. These night surveys required researchers to work in conditions dramatically different from daytime diving, relying on artificial lights that created limited visibility bubbles in otherwise complete darkness. The work carried inherent risks that most researchers accepted as necessary for understanding reef ecology. The particular reef system where Isabella Cruz conducted her research lay approximately 8 kilometers offshore, accessible only by boat during daylight hours. The area had been studied intermittently since the 1970s, with various institutions documenting changes in coral health and fish populations over the decades. Local fishing communities had long reported unusual concentrations of spawning activity during specific lunar cycles, observations that later scientific studies confirmed. The reef structure itself consisted of spur and groove formations typical of the Florida Keys, with coral ridges alternating with sandy channels that created a complex 3-dimensional habitat. Water depth across the study area ranged from 3 to 7 meters, shallow enough for snorkeling, but deep enough to support diverse marine life. Isabella Cruz had completed her doctorate in marine biology 2 years earlier and had secured a postdoctoral position focused on reef fish reproduction. At 33, she had extensive diving experience, including advanced certifications for night diving and scientific diving protocols. Her current project involved documenting spawning aggregations of various reef fish species, work that required her to snorkel above specific reef sections during predictable lunar phases when spawning activity peaked. The research held practical importance beyond academic interest, as understanding spawning patterns helped inform fishing regulations and marine protected area management. Her colleague, Marcus Lee, a fellow postdoctoral researcher studying coral physiology, accompanied her on most night surveys, though he typically observed from a floating buoy rather than entering the water himself. The night survey schedule demanded flexibility, as spawning events occurred within narrow time windows that shifted with lunar cycles and tidal patterns. Isabella had conducted 17 successful night surveys over the previous 4 months, accumulating data on 7 different fish species. Her methodology involved swimming predetermined transects across the reef, while recording observations on waterproof data sheets, a technique refined through years of similar fieldwork. Previous surveys had revealed predators, including barracuda and nurse sharks, though none had shown aggressive interest in her presence. The consistency of these encounters had perhaps fostered a degree of complacency about nocturnal shark interactions. On the night of August 17th, conditions appeared optimal for spawning observations. The moon, 3 days past full, provided ambient light that supplemented their dive lights. Water temperature measured a comfortable 28 degrees Celsius, and surface conditions showed almost no wave action. Isabella entered the water shortly after 10 o'clock, wearing a wetsuit despite the warm temperature as protection against jellyfish and fire coral. She carried a powerful dive light attached to her wrist and a smaller backup light clipped to her vest. Marcus positioned himself on an inflatable buoy approximately 30 meters away, monitoring her location and maintaining radio contact through waterproof communication equipment. Isabella swam slowly across the reef, pausing frequently to observe fish behavior. Schools of small fish scattered in silver flashes whenever her light swept across them, creating dynamic patterns that she found beautiful despite years of familiarity. She documented several spawning events during the first 40 minutes, noting species, time, and behavioral details on her data sheet. The work proceeded smoothly, matching her expectations based on previous surveys. She had been in the water for roughly 40 minutes when the black tip shark appeared. The species, common throughout the Florida Keys, typically displayed skittish behavior around humans during daylight hours. Night conditions, however, altered shark behavior patterns in ways that researchers did not fully understand. The individual that approached Isabella measured approximately 6 feet in length, large enough to be confident, but small enough to be curious, rather than deliberately predatory. The shark likely detected her presence through the electrical fields generated by her body and equipment, drawing it toward the unusual disturbance in its territory. Isabella first noticed the shark when its pale belly flashed through the edge of her light beam. She stopped swimming immediately, recognizing the distinctive black-tipped fins that gave the species its name. The shark circled at a distance of roughly 5 meters, its movements fluid and controlled. Isabella maintained her position, knowing that sudden movements might trigger investigatory aggression. She signaled Marcus with her light, flashing a predetermined pattern that indicated shark presence but no immediate danger. The shark completed 2 circles before approaching more closely. On its third pass, it bumped her left leg with its snout, an exploratory behavior that marine biologists called bump and bite testing. The impact knocked Isabella off balance, breaking her calm composure. Her heart rate accelerated dramatically, and her breathing became rapid and shallow through her snorkel. The shark circled again, emboldened by her reaction. Isabella began swimming slowly toward Marcus's position, maintaining visual contact with the shark while trying to control her panic. The predator followed, matching her pace and occasionally surging forward to bump her again. On one approach, it grazed her right thigh with its flank, its rough skin abrading her wetsuit. Isabella's training emphasized avoiding splashing and erratic movements, but her discipline eroded with each passing moment. Marcus recognized the deteriorating situation and began calling to her through the radio, though his words barely registered through her focused terror. She covered the 30 meters to his buoy in what felt like hours, though her watch later indicated less than 3 minutes had elapsed. The shark made one final approach as she reached the buoy, bumping her leg again before turning away and disappearing into the darkness beyond her light's reach. Marcus helped her onto the buoy platform, his hand shaking nearly as badly as hers. They remained there for several minutes, scanning the surrounding darkness for any sign of the shark's return. When Isabella finally examined her legs, she discovered shallow lacerations on her right thigh where the shark's skin had abraded through the wetsuit material. The wounds required cleaning and stitching but posed no serious medical threat. They abandoned the night's research and returned to shore immediately, where Isabella received treatment at a small medical clinic. The attending physician cleaned the wounds thoroughly and administered a tetanus booster along with prophylactic antibiotics. She spent the following week on antibiotics to prevent infection while the lacerations healed. The incident prompted her to reassess her night snorkeling protocols, eventually leading to a decision to conduct future nocturnal observations using underwater cameras mounted on remote equipment rather than entering the water herself. She presented her findings at a research conference 3 months later, incorporating a discussion of the encounter and its implications for field research safety. She later acknowledged that while the black-tip shark had likely never intended to seriously harm her, the experience had revealed psychological vulnerabilities that years of daylight diving had never exposed. The incident served as a reminder that even smaller shark species could create dangerous situations during night operations, and that a researcher's confidence built through daylight experience did not necessarily translate to nocturnal conditions, where visibility, communication, and escape options all became severely compromised.